I never thought my peaceful lakeside retreat would turn into a battlefield over electricity of all things. My cabin sits tucked away in the pines, far from the city, powered by a generator I built with my own two hands. Out here, it's quiet, no traffic, no rules, no chaos. At least that's what I thought. Enter Karen. Every neighborhood seems cursed with one, but mine came with an extra dose of entitlement. Clipboard in hand, self-appointed HOA, president of an area that doesn't even have an HOA. She decided my generator, my power, my comfort all belonged to her. The kicker, my generator isn't just any generator. It's wired with a little surprise for anyone dumb enough to steal from it. And Karen in all her bossy glory was about to learn that the hard way. Before we dive in, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where you're all watching from. There's a special kind of quiet you only find near the water. Mornings at my cabin begin with the call of loons echoing across the lake and the smell of pine drifting through the windows. I brew coffee on the porch, watch the mist lift off the water, and remind myself that this is why I moved out here: peace. No traffic jams, no HOA board meetings, no neighbor's dog barking at 3 in the morning. Just me, my cabin, and the hum of my trusty generator tucked behind the shed. That generator, by the way, is my pride and joy. I salvaged the frame, rebuilt the engine, and wired it to power everything from my fridge to the lights strung along the porch. Out here, when storms knock down lines or the grid fails, which happens often, that machine keeps me alive and comfortable. It's not pretty, but it purrs like a loyal old dog. I'd go as far as to say it's the heartbeat of the cabin. And for a while, life was perfect. A few friendly neighbors dotted the lakeshore. Old Tom across the cove, who'd lend me his canoe whenever I needed it. The Johnson family, who baked too many pies and insisted I take one every other weekend. They minded their own business, and I minded mine. A quiet community. A good community. Until she showed up. Her name was Karen. At least that's what everyone called her. I swear she must have been born with that name stamped across her forehead, because she lived up to every single stereotype. Sharp blonde bob haircut that never moved out of place. Oversized sunglasses even at dusk. And always a clipboard tucked under her arm. She strutted around the neighborhood like she'd been elected mayor, even though no one ever asked her to run anything. "Good morning," she said, the first time she came to my porch, not so much a greeting as an announcement. I looked up from sanding down the railing, squinting against the sun, wondering why she was standing on my property like she owned it. "Morning," I replied cautiously. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I'm the head of the homeowners association. Just wanted to let you know a few things around here have to change. We have regulations about yard clutter and noise." I nearly laughed. "Homeowners association, lady, this is a lakeside cabin community. There's no HOA here." But she wasn't smiling. "Oh, there is now. I've drafted bylaws. Everyone will receive a copy. It's important we maintain property values." That was my first taste of Karen's self-appointed dictatorship. She wanted to control how tall your grass grew, what color your cabin was painted, even where you could park your canoe. Most of us just shook our heads and ignored her. After all, what power did she really have? None. But that didn't stop her from acting like she owned every pine needle in the county. At first, I brushed her off. She was annoying, sure, but harmless. Let her play pretend president with her clipboard. I had bigger things to worry about, like keeping the firewood dry and making sure my fishing lines didn't tangle. Besides, I figured she'd get bored eventually. But Karen wasn't the type to get bored. No, she was the type to escalate. It started with comments. "That generator of yours is an eyesore. It's probably disturbing the wildlife. Do you know it lowers property values when people can hear a motor running at night?" I shrugged. "It's not that loud, and besides, it's my property." That line, "it's my property," was like gasoline on her fire. You could see it in her eyes. She hated being reminded that she didn't actually have authority here, that her rules meant nothing. Still, I tried to be neighborly. I offered her coffee once. She refused, muttering something about caffeine being against community guidelines. I swear the woman invented fake rules the way squirrels stash acorns by the dozen. The other neighbors whispered about her too. Some rolled their eyes. A few were intimidated by her constant threats of fines and reports. Not me. I dealt with her type before. Back when I lived in the suburbs, the real HOA president tried to tell me where I could park my truck. I didn't back down then, and I wasn't about to start now. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was just how far Karen was willing to go. It wasn't enough for her to nag about lawn ornaments or noise. No, Karen wanted control over everything. And when she saw my generator quietly humming away each night, lighting up my cabin like a beacon in the dark, she decided that power, literal electrical power, should be hers too. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in those early weeks, things still felt manageable. I'd nod when she ranted, then close the door and go back to my peace. The lake was still calm, the nights were still quiet, and my generator still hummed, like a faithful friend, pumping light into my little slice of paradise. I just didn't realize that Karen had already set her sights on it. And once Karen wanted something, she didn't stop until she got it, or until she got herself burned trying. You can usually tell when a storm is coming. The sky darkens, the air turns heavy, and the wind shifts in that strange way that makes the back of your neck itch. Trouble with Karen was no different. It gave off a certain smell before it hit. The first real crack of thunder came one Friday evening. I'd been chopping wood most of the day and was sitting on my porch, watching the sun sink behind the trees, when the familiar hum of my generator kicked in. To me, that sound meant comfort. To Karen, apparently, it meant war. She marched up the gravel path like she was leading an army, sunglasses perched on her head, clipboard clutched tight as if it were a holy scripture. Without so much as a hello, she pointed at the shed where the generator sat. That thing, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, is violating community noise ordinances. I stared at her. Noise ordinances? What community? This is a cabin in the woods. Karen narrowed her eyes. We are a community. And as the head of the HOA, I'm giving you an official warning. If the noise continues past 8 p.m., you'll be fined. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my beer. A fine from who? You? Yes, she snapped. From the HOA treasury. Lady, I said, wiping tears of laughter from my eyes, the only treasury out here is my bait bucket. Her lips pursed so tight I thought they might fuse shut. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stomped back down the path. I figured that was the end of it. Just another Karen tantrum, nothing more. But that was just the first sign. The second came 2 nights later. I was lying in bed half asleep when I heard rustling outside. At first, I thought it was raccoons. They loved to nose around the garbage bins. But when I peeked through the blinds, I caught a glimpse of something else, a flashlight beam sweeping across my yard. Someone was out there sneaking around. I grabbed my boots and stepped quietly onto the porch. The light flickered near the shed that housed my generator. And standing there trying way too hard to look casual in the middle of the night was none other than Karen. What are you doing? I called out. She jumped like a guilty teenager. Oh, I was just checking for safety violations. Safety violations? At midnight? It's community business, she stammered. Generators can be fire hazards. Then why didn't you knock on the door and ask to look? She didn't answer. She just clutched her clipboard tighter and scurried off into the darkness. That's when the alarm bells started ringing in my head. She wasn't just nosy, she was obsessed. And obsession never ends well. The third sign was the most damning. A week later, I came home from town with groceries and noticed something odd near the base of my cabin. A thin black cable snaked through the grass running from the side of my shed toward the tree line. At first, I thought maybe I'd dropped an extension cord, but as I followed it, my stomach twisted. The cable ran straight across the yard and into Karen's property. I crouched down, inspecting where it connected. Sure enough, someone had tapped into the output line of my generator. My machine was pumping electricity straight into Karen's house. I felt my blood pressure rise. She wasn't just complaining about my generator anymore. She was stealing from it. That night I couldn't sit still. I paced the porch, replaying it over and over. She'd had the nerve to sneak onto my land, dig around my shed, and hook up her own line like some back alley electrician. I pictured her smug face sipping wine inside her cabin, lights glowing warm and bright thanks to my generator. She probably told herself she deserved it, that she was entitled, that her fake HOA rules gave her some kind of authority over my power. But entitlement doesn't change the facts. What she'd done was theft, plain and simple. The next morning I decided to confront her. I didn't bother with subtlety. I walked right up to her porch, knocked on the door, and waited. She opened it slowly, as if she already knew why I was there. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice dripping with fake politeness. "You sure can," I said, "by explaining why there's a cord running from my generator into your house." For a split second, guilt flickered in her eyes. Then she plastered on that smug smile. "Oh, that I thought it was a community power source. It's only fair that we all benefit." "Community power source," I barked, a laugh. "Karen, it's my generator. I built it, I maintain it, and you broke onto my land to steal from it." Her chin jutted out defiantly. "Don't be dramatic. It's just electricity. Besides, you don't own the resources of the community. The HOA charter is very clear. Shared assets benefit everyone." I shook my head in disbelief. "There is no HOA charter. And even if there was, my generator wouldn't be in it. Disconnect it. Now. Her eyes narrowed into slits. Or what you'll call the police. They'll side with me. I'm keeping this neighborhood safe and regulated. That's when I realized she wasn't just bold, she was delusional. I walked away before I did something I'd regret, but inside I was seething. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, because Karen had made a critical mistake. She thought my generator was just an engine hooked up to wires. She didn't know I'd modified it years ago, back when some nosy hunters tried stealing my fuel. I'd installed a little surprise, a non-lethal high-voltage deterrent system. One touch of a tampered line and the thief would get the shock of their life. Karen had no idea what she'd just plugged herself into, and part of me was tempted to let her find out the hard way. The morning after discovering Karen's cable theft, I woke up restless. Sleep hadn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined her smug grin lights blazing in her cabin while mine dimmed. My patience had run out. Enough was enough. I decided to confront her face to face. No more sidelong comments, no more pretending this was just a quirky neighbor problem. This was theft, plain and simple. I marched across the gravel road to her property boots, crunching with each step, and knocked on her front door hard enough to rattle the frame. When Karen finally appeared, she was already armed with her clipboard like a shield. She cocked her head with mock sweetness. "Back again, did you come to apologize for raising your voice yesterday?" "Apologize," I barked, a humorless laugh. "Karen, you tapped into my generator. That's theft." "I'm not here to apologize, I'm here to tell you to disconnect it. Right now." She crossed her arms, tapping the clipboard against her hip like a weapon. "You're being dramatic. It's not theft. It's community resource management." "Community resource management." I stepped closer, my voice low but sharp. "Karen, you broke onto my property in the middle of the night and hooked up a line like a thief in the dark. You know what that's called in the real world: stealing." Her face flushed crimson, but instead of backing down, she doubled down, like all Karens do. "This entire lakeside is governed by HOA guidelines, and as the elected president, elected by who I cut her off. Because the last time I checked, there was no election. You just showed up one day with a clipboard and decided you were queen." She bristled, glaring at me like I'd spat on her crown. "Someone has to maintain standards. Without rules, people like you would run wild junk in your yard, noisy machines disturbing the peace. I'm keeping order." Order, I gestured toward my cabin. "That generator keeps my fridge running, my lights on, and my water pump working. It's not junk, it's survival. And you don't get to just steal it because your little fantasy HOA says so." Her tone turned icy. "If you don't comply, I'll report you. To the authorities." "Report me for what? Owning property, generating my own power, for endangering the community," she snapped, clearly improvising. "Gasoline engines are a fire risk. I could have the fire marshal condemn your setup." I shook my head slowly, letting her see my disbelief. "So let me get this straight. You sneak into my yard, tap into my power without permission, and now you're threatening to report me. Do you hear yourself?" She waved her hand dismissively, like brushing off an annoying fly. "I'm protecting the neighborhood. You should be thanking me." I clenched my jaw. She wasn't going to admit guilt, people like her never do. But if she thought she could bully me into backing down, she had another thing coming. "I'll give you one chance," I said evenly, staring her down. "Disconnect the line today, or I'll handle it myself." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty, but it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced with that familiar arrogance. "Do your worst. The neighbors are already on my side. They're sick of your noise and your independence. You think you're above the rules. Well, you're not. Above the rules," I laughed coldly. "Karen, the only rules out here are property lines, and you crossed mine." The standoff stretched in silence, the lake breeze rustling the pines above us. Finally, she turned on her heel and slammed the door, leaving me standing there with my blood boiling. But she wasn't done. Oh no, not by a long shot. That evening, as I took a walk along the lakeshore, I noticed something odd pinned to a telephone pole. A flyer. In bold letters it read, "Notice of violation, Community HOA," and beneath that, my name. According to the flyer, I was being fined $500 for unauthorized generator operation and failure to comply with HOA standards. I tore it down and crumpled it in my fist. As I walked further, I found 3 more. She'd plastered the entire neighborhood with her nonsense. The neighbors whispered as I passed, some shaking their heads in sympathy, others avoiding my gaze. Karen had been busy spinning her story to anyone who would listen. By the time I got back to my cabin, another paper was waiting on my porch, an official-looking letter with the same nonsense fines. "Payment due in 10 days or further action will be taken." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about power. This was about control. Karen didn't just want my electricity, she wanted to humiliate me, to establish dominance, to prove that her imaginary HOA carried weight. But I wasn't about to roll over. I dealt with bullies before, and I knew one thing for certain: bullies crumble when they face someone who won't play their game. I sat on my porch looking out at the generator shed. The hum of the motor filled the evening air, steady and reliable. Karen thought she'd outsmarted me by sneaking into my yard and leeching off my power. She had no idea that her arrogance had set her up for a fall. Because that generator, it wasn't just a machine, it was bait. And the trap was already wired. If Karen had stopped after the flyers, maybe things would have fizzled out. Maybe the neighbors would have laughed off her fake fines and she would have crawled back into whatever fantasy world she lived in. But Karen wasn't wired that way. She didn't back down when she hit resistance, she doubled down. The next week she escalated her war against me. It started small. Flyers turned into letters, letters turned into threats. One morning I opened my cabin door and found a bright red envelope taped to it. Inside was a final notice claiming I owed $1 500-inch fines for continued violations. It was written in all caps, bold font like some kind of ransom demand. At the bottom it said, "Failure to pay will result in legal action by the HOA." I couldn't help but laugh. Legal action by the HOA, I muttered aloud. There was no HOA. The only law out here was county law, and the sheriff barely patrolled this area. If Karen thought she could sue me in her imaginary court, she was out of her mind. Still, I kept the letter. Not because I was worried, but because it was proof. Proof that Karen was digging herself deeper. Later that same day, I caught her pacing at the end of my driveway with two of her so-called allies' neighbors she'd sweet-talked or bullied into compliance. One of them, a timid guy named Harold, kept his eyes down, clearly uncomfortable. The other, a woman named Diane, was nodding eagerly at every word Karen spewed. When I stepped outside, Karen raised her voice so the whole world could hear. "This man is a danger to our community. His generator is a fire hazard. His refusal to comply with HOA standards puts us all at risk." "Karen," I said calmly, "there is no HOA. You can stop the charade." She ignored me, turning to the others. "We have to stand united. If we don't stop him, who knows what'll happen? He could burn the whole forest down." The irony wasn't lost on me. She was stealing power from the very machine she called a hazard. The whispers among neighbors grew louder after that. Some sided with me. They knew Karen was a fraud. Others, too, afraid of conflict, stayed silent. But Karen thrived on that silence. She mistook fear for obedience. A few days later, her campaign took a darker turn. I came home from town to find my cabin door smeared with a thick strip of orange paint. Above it, taped neatly, was another notice: "Property condemned by order of the OA." My fists clenched. This wasn't just paper anymore, this was vandalism. She'd crossed a line. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer, staring at the generator shed. The steady hum calmed me, reminded me that I wasn't powerless. Karen thought she was in control, but she had no idea the machine she coveted was more than it seemed. Years ago, after a group of hunters siphoned fuel from it while I was gone, I installed a deterrent system. A jolt of electricity wired into the output lines. Not lethal, not enough to kill, but strong enough to send a thief sprawling. I hadn't thought about it in years. But now, looking at Karen's cord running into her yard, I realized fate had handed me a perfect setup. I didn't have to do a thing. All I had to do was wait. And sure enough, Karen couldn't resist pushing further. The following evening, I deliberately left my cabin dark. I shut off my lights, pulled the curtains, and made it look like I'd gone out of town. In reality, I sat in the shadows by the porch watching. Around 10 p.m., I saw movement near the tree line. Karen emerged, flashlight in hand, dragging another length of cable. Behind her was Diane, nervously glancing around like a kid about to shoplift. "Keep quiet," Karen hissed. "He's not here. We'll just hook up directly, and he'll never notice." They crept toward the shed, fumbling with the wires. From where I sat, I could see Karen's grin, sharp, triumphant. She thought she was about to outsmart me, about to leech off my hard-earned power like a queen demanding tribute. But she didn't know the trap was already set. The system wasn't dangerous, but it was humiliating. Enough voltage to light her up like a Christmas tree. Enough to make the entire neighborhood hear her scream. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, a wicked smile tugging at my lips. Let her try. Let her steal. The storm she'd been stirring was about to break, and she was standing right in the lightning's path. When you're dealing with someone like Karen, the best weapon you have isn't anger, it's patience. Let them dig their own hole deep enough, and all you have to do is stand back and watch them fall in. By the time I caught her running that second cable, I knew exactly how this was going to end. I'd already checked the generator's deterrent system earlier that day just to be sure it still worked. It wasn't fancy, just a non-lethal shock wired into the output terminals with a grounding rod buried nearby. The idea was simple: if anyone tampered with the connections or tried to siphon off power without doing it the right way, they'd complete the circuit. The jolt would rattle their bones, maybe singe some hair, but nothing more. Back when I first set it up, I tested it with an old pair of pliers. Even through the rubber grips, it nearly knocked the tool out of my hand. Effective. Standing there in the shadows of my porch that night, watching Karen and Diane crouch by the shed, I felt that old mix of dread and anticipation. Part of me still couldn't believe she'd gone this far. Another part of me was almost impressed. It takes a special kind of arrogance to sneak onto someone's land and literally steal their power, Diane whispered nervously, her flashlight beam bouncing around like a jittery firefly. Karen, maybe we shouldn't. What if he catches us? Karen hissed. He's gone. I told you I checked. The cabin's dark. He probably went back to town. Stop being dramatic. I could see Diane's hands shaking as she uncoiled the cable. Karen snatched it from her with an exasperated sigh. Useless. I'll do it myself. That was Karen in a nutshell. Bossy, controlling, convinced she knew better than everyone else. She crouched over the generator, muttering under her breath as she fiddled with the connections. Her clipboard, never far away, rested on the grass beside her like some kind of sacred text. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my beer, letting the moment stretch. Every instinct in me wanted to storm out there, catch her red-handed, and let loose. But I knew better. Words wouldn't stop Karen. Humiliation would. The hum of the generator deepened as she yanked on the cable. She gave Diane a triumphant look. See, easy. Now we'll have free power. He'll never know. Oh, I knew. I knew every move she made. As she tightened the clamp onto the terminal, I saw her grin widen. For one split second, she looked like a cat who'd finally cornered a mouse. The irony made me chuckle under my breath. She had no idea she was the mouse. Diane glanced nervously toward my cabin. Karen, are you sure this is safe? Karen rolled her eyes. Safe. Of course it's safe. Do I look like an amateur? I've read the HOA safety guidelines cover to cover. I know what I'm doing. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh out loud. The HOA safety guidelines she was quoting didn't even exist. She'd written them herself, probably while sipping boxed wine and imagining herself in a power suit. I stayed put, letting her commit fully, because once she did, there would be no denying it. No lies, no excuses, no gaslighting the neighbors into believing her version of events. Everyone would hear. Everyone would see. As she fumbled with the final clamp, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, not revenge exactly, but justice. The kind of justice you don't have to lift a finger to deliver. I thought back to the weeks leading up to this, the flyers, the fake fines, the vandalized door, the endless harassment. Every step had been Karen trying to prove she was untouchable. But now, crouched over my generator with her greedy little hands, she was about to prove the exact opposite. Diane muttered again. Karen, I really think we should go. What if he comes back right now? Karen snapped. Stop whining. This is bigger than him. This is about fairness, about the community. He doesn't own that power. We all do. I'm just making it official. And with that, she clamped the line down tight. I knew what was coming, but I still flinched when it happened. There was a sharp crack like a whip, followed by a loud pop as the circuit completed. Karen's whole body jolted upright, her arms flailing like a rag doll in a hurricane. A scream tore from her throat, high and piercing, echoing through the quiet night. The generator lights flickered, then steadied while Karen collapsed onto the grass, moaning. Diane shrieked, dropping the flashlight, which rolled across the ground and illuminated the scene in harsh white beams. From the cabins down the road, doors slammed open. Neighbors poured out onto porches, squinting into the darkness. What was that? Someone shouted. Did you hear that scream? Perfect? The audience had arrived. Karen staggered to her feet, hair frizzed and sticking out in wild tufts, her sunglasses askew. Her clipboard lay a few feet away, the pages fluttering in the breeze. For the first time since she'd moved in, she didn't look powerful or in control. She looked ridiculous. I finally stood walking out of the shadows with slow, deliberate steps. Evening, Karen. Diane. My voice carried just enough to reach the neighbors gathering in the road. Karen froze, her face pale. What are you doing here? I live here, I said, simply gesturing to my dark cabin. Unlike some people, I don't sneak around in the middle of the night, stealing from my neighbors. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The whispers among the crowd grew louder. Someone laughed. Someone else muttered, figures. Diane tried to help her up, but Karen shoved her away, still trembling from the shock. "This isn't over," she spat, but her voice cracked, betraying her. "Oh, I think it is," I said calmly, "because now everyone's seen what you really are." The neighbors stood watching, half amused, half appalled. And Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was suddenly nothing more than a soggy, frazzled thief caught in the act. And the best part, I hadn't laid a finger on her. The generator had done all the work. There are certain sounds you don't forget in life. The cry of a newborn, the crunch of gravel under your boots on a frosty morning, and apparently the blood-curdling shriek of an entitled woman getting zapped by a generator she tried to steal from. That scream still rings in my ears. Karen was sprawled on the ground beside the shed, twitching slightly, hair standing up like she'd stuck her head in a balloon factory. Her precious clipboard had landed a few feet away, half the pages scattered into the damp grass. Diane, bless her timid heart, was frozen stiff, hands over her mouth, eyes wide in horror. The generator, steady and loyal, hummed on like nothing had happened. The deterrent system had done exactly what it was designed to do: shock and shame, not harm. Karen wasn't injured, at least not permanently. But her pride, that had taken a direct hit. Within minutes, the neighborhood had gathered. Porch lights flicked on one by one, illuminating the gravel road and casting shadows across the pine trees. Voices carried through the cool night air. "What's going on out here? Was that a scream? Is she okay?" They all converged at the scene, their flashlights forming a circle of interrogation. And right there in the middle of that circle was Karen, queen of her imaginary HOA, now reduced to a soaking, smoking mess. I stepped forward, my boots crunching in the gravel, calm, collected. "The way you walk when you know the truth is on your side." "Evening, everyone," I said, nodding at the crowd. "Looks like we had a little incident." Karen staggered to her feet, wobbling like a newborn deer. Her face was red with fury, her hands trembling as she pointed at me. He attacked me. He tried to electrocute me." Gasps rippled through the neighbors, but not the kind she wanted. No one rushed to her defense. They'd all seen her crouched over my generator cable in hand before the shock. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Attacked you, Karen. You were trespassing on my property, stealing power from my generator. And then, well, let's just say it doesn't take kindly to intruders." Laughter erupted from the back of the group. Old Tom, leaning on his cane, barked out, "Serves you right." A few others chuckled nervously, covering their mouths. Karen's eyes darted from face to face, desperate for support. But the more she pleaded, the more ridiculous she looked. Her once perfect bob was now a frazzled halo, strands sticking straight out as if she'd rubbed her head on a wool sweater. Her clothes clung awkwardly with sweat, and the smell of singed fabric lingered in the air. Diane finally found her voice. "Karen, maybe we should just go home." "Home?" Karen screeched. "No, he can't get away with this. This is an attack on the HOA." "The what?" someone muttered from the crowd. "The HOA," Karen shouted, stomping her foot like a toddler. "The Homeowners Association. I'm the president. That did it." The crowd burst into open laughter. Someone clapped sarcastically. Another neighbor whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "There's no HOA here, you lunatic." Karen's face twisted, caught between rage and humiliation. Her empire of flyers and fake fines crumbled in an instant. For weeks she'd strutted around like a queen, wielding her clipboard like a scepter. And now, stripped of her illusion, she was just a thief who'd electrocuted herself trying to steal what wasn't hers. I stepped closer, lowering my voice, but making sure everyone could still hear. "You see, Karen, this is what happens when you push too far. You can invent fake rules. You can hand out fake fines. But when you break into someone's property and steal their power, reality has a way of shocking you back to your senses." A ripple of amusement ran through the group. Someone even clapped me on the shoulder. Karen, trembling with rage, tried one last time to spin the story. "He's dangerous. That generator is illegal. You're all in danger as long as he has it." But her words fell flat. The crowd had seen too much. They'd seen her sneak in. They'd heard her scream. They'd watched her lie, and they weren't buying it anymore. "Illegal?" I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, the sheriff didn't think so when he inspected it last year. You know what is illegal. Trespassing. Theft. Tampering with someone else's property." That landed like a hammer. You could see the color drain from Karen's face. The neighbors began to disperse, some shaking their heads, others chuckling under their breath. The show was over, and the star performer had bombed. Diane tugged at Karen's arm, trying to lead her away, but Karen yanked free, glaring at me, with a promise of vengeance burning in her eyes. "This isn't the end," she spat, her voice hoarse. "You'll regret humiliating me." I didn't flinch. I simply leaned against the shed, arms crossed, and said, "Karen, the only one humiliating you is you." She stormed off into the night, dragging Diane behind her. The crowd followed, leaving me alone with my faithful generator still humming steadily as if mocking the entire ordeal. I let out a long breath, the tension draining from my shoulders. For weeks, Karen had pushed, bullied, and lied. Tonight, she'd pushed too far, and the universe, with a little help from my wiring skills, had pushed back. The best part, I hadn't lifted a finger. Justice had a way of delivering itself when arrogance met reality. But as I sat back on my porch, listening to the crickets resume their song, I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen don't surrender. They plot. They scheme. They wait for the next chance to claw back control. What I didn't know then was that her next move would bring the law into the picture, and the final act of this drama would play out not just under the pines but in the cold light of official judgment. For now, though, I savored the victory. Karen had been shocked back into her place, and for the first time in weeks I slept peacefully, with the steady hum of my generator lulling me into dreams. Morning light has a way of making the ridiculous look even more absurd. By sunrise, word of Karen's midnight fiasco had spread like wildfire. I couldn't even step onto my porch without catching the whispers of neighbors strolling by. Some laughed openly, retelling the story with exaggerated hand gestures, Karen flopping on the ground like a fish sparks flying from the shed. Others spoke in hushed tones, shaking their heads. For the first time since she'd arrived, people weren't intimidated by Karen. They were entertained. Around mid-morning, I spotted her across the road. She looked rough hair, still frizzy from the shock eyes, sunken with lack of sleep, clipboard missing from her hand. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the orange paint on my door, the fake fines, the stolen power. Sympathy faded fast. She tried to salvage her dignity, of course. Karen always did. She marched down the gravel road telling anyone who would listen that I had set a booby trap on my property, that it was illegal, that I had endangered the whole community. But the more she ranted, the more people laughed. One neighbor even asked her if she was going to write herself a citation for attempted theft. By afternoon, the final nail in her coffin arrived in the form of 2 sheriff's deputies. Their SUV pulled into the neighborhood lights, flashing softly in the daylight. Karen rushed out to meet them, her arms waving, her voice shrill enough to startle the birds from the trees. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. He tried to electrocute me. He's running an unsafe generator. Arrest him immediately." The deputies listened patiently, nodding, jotting notes. Then they walked over to me, where I sat calmly on my porch, sipping coffee. "Sir," one of them said, "we just need to ask a few questions." I explained everything. The generator, the modifications, the trespassing. I showed them the cord Karen had run into her property. I even handed over the stack of fake HOA fines and flyers I'd saved. The deputies flipped through them, eyebrows climbing higher with each page. "So let me get this straight," the taller deputy said. "She broke onto your property, tapped into your generator without permission, then claimed you assaulted her when she got shocked by your own equipment." "Pretty much," I replied. The shorter deputy let out a low whistle. "That's theft of services, trespassing, and vandalism at minimum." Karen, who had followed us over, exploded. "This is outrageous. I am the president of the HOA. He's lying." The deputies turned to her unimpressed. "Ma'am, we checked with the county. There's no registered HOA here. And even if there were, you can't steal electricity from someone else's property." Her jaw dropped. For once, words failed her. The taller deputy wrote something on his clipboard. An actual clipboard, not Karen's pretend one. "We'll be issuing you a citation, ma'am. You'll need to appear in court." The color drained from her face. She sputtered, tried to argue, but the deputies shut her down. "Enough. You're lucky he isn't pressing full charges. Consider this your warning." It was a surreal moment, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen finally dethroned by real authority. As the deputies drove off, neighbors clapped quietly, some even cheering. Karen stomped back to her cabin, humiliated, dragging Diane behind her like an unwilling accomplice. The once fearsome HOA president was now a joke, her empire of paper fines reduced to ash. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood changed. People relaxed. They waved more, chatted freely, no longer worried about Karen's clipboard patrols. Old Tom even brought over a pie with a wink, saying, "Guess you shocked some sense into her." Karen, meanwhile, kept to herself. No more flyers, no more midnight prowling, no more fake fines. Her lights stayed dark most nights, maybe because she no longer had the nerve to run a cable to my shed. As for me, I finally had peace again. My cabin returned to what it had always been, a quiet refuge by the lake, powered by a humming generator and unbothered by tyrants. But I'll never forget the look on her face that night, the exact moment her arrogance collided with reality, the split second before the shock, that my friends was justice in its purest form. If there's one thing this whole ordeal taught me, it's that entitlement and arrogance always carry a price. You can bluff, bully, and bluster all you want, but eventually reality will catch up and it doesn't care about your clipboard or your imaginary authority. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought she could take what wasn't hers, invent rules, and bend everyone around her to her will. But when her greed crossed the line, she found out the hard way that you can't steal someone else's power literally or figuratively without consequences. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. Stand your ground. Protect what's yours, but do it with patience. Sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling or fighting back, it's letting people expose themselves for who they really are. Because in the end, Karen wasn't defeated by me. She was defeated by her own actions, her own lies, her own ego. All I had to do was sit back, sip my coffee, and let the generator do its work. So here's my question to you. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have confronted her sooner or let her learn the hard way like I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And hey, if you enjoyed this little saga of HOA drama, entitlement, and sweet shocking justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, there's always another story waiting just around the corner.